welcome to today's meeting of Democrats of Greater Tucson. My name is Larry Bodine. I'm the president of Democrats of Greater Tucson, and I will be your host today. Just want to say a quick hello to David Lujan before I introduce him. David, how are you today? Thanks for being on the call.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, looking forward to your remarks. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. One is, be sure to get your ballot in the mail. Don't let it, all right, yes, I voted early, exactly. Take it to a polling place, or rather a drop-off place, but whatever you do, get that ballot in. Attendees are highly encouraged to ask questions, and you do that by clicking on the participants icon down at the bottom, and you will see an opportunity to raise your blue hand, just like this. And that's how you ask a question. This glove also does double duty as the blue wave. We have a blue wave coming, and here it is. So with those distractions out of the way, let me introduce Attorney David Lujan, who is going to discuss why voters should pass Prop 208, the Invest in Ed ballot initiative. David is one of the authors of the 2018 and the 2020 versions of the initiative. Passage of Prop 208 will mean that Arizona's commitment to public schools will be restored, the state's economy will benefit, education funding after a decade of cuts by Republican legislators will be restored and stabilized. It'll reduce the teacher shortages and class sizes should become smaller. David is also the director of the Arizona Center for Economic Progress. He's a former member of the state Senate and the state House, and has worked in public policy in Arizona for 20 years. And with that, David, tell us about Prop 208.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to join you today. As was mentioned, I'm the director of the Arizona Center for Economic Progress, and we are one of 5 organizations behind Proposition 208. The others are Children's Action Alliance, the Arizona Education Association, Stand for Children, and the Arizona Interfaith Network. And we've been working together for 4 years now to try and put a solution on the table to help address the funding crisis in Arizona's public schools. And as you may recall, and as was mentioned, we tried to do a ballot initiative in 2018 that was unsuccessful, but we said then that we were going to stick together and that we would be back in 2020 if the legislature or others failed to come forward with a good plan to fix the funding crisis in our public schools. And so here we are in 2020 with Proposition 208. And really the bottom line why we are doing this is because for the past decade, no state in the country has cut more funding from its public education system than Arizona. More than $2 billion was cut over the past decade. Much of that funding has never been restored or repaid back to school districts. And school districts today are operating with less funding than they had back in 2008. And we're feeling the ramifications of that in one of the worst teacher shortage crises in the country. And new data was actually just released a couple of weeks ago that shows that teacher shortage is getting worse, with more than 1,700 classrooms statewide without a qualified certified teacher. And we also have some of the largest class sizes in the country. And so Proposition 208 will raise an estimated $940 million each year in new voter protected revenue that the politicians at the state capitol cannot touch, and that comes with strict accountability that can only be used for very specific purposes. And those purposes include increasing teacher salaries, but also increasing the salaries of other school staff that is not administrative. It cannot go to any school administration, but other school staff that play a critical role in educating our kids, people like school nurses, school counselors, classroom aides, librarians, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, custodial workers, all the people that play a role in educating our kids would have new revenue for giving those people wage increases. Many of those positions have not been increased over the years because of all the funding cuts. Schools have not been able to give regular wages. But schools could also use that money to hire new staff. Many of those positions have had to be cut over the years, which is one of the reasons why we have the large class sizes, because you don't have the staff to support smaller class sizes. And then another chunk of the money, about 12% of all the revenue raised, will go to career and technical education. And that, by the way, is enough revenue that will more than double state funding for career and technical education programs. And these are the programs that are so critical to filling highly demanded jobs in our workforce and giving students the skills in high school to be able to join the workforce and to take those jobs. And so career and technical education, many organizations and people around the state have recognized the value of career and technical education for years. Unfortunately, because of the cuts, many school districts have had to cut back on those programs. And so with Proposition 208, one of the other benefits is that, as I said, state funding for those programs will more than double with Proposition 208. And so 99% of the revenue raised by Proposition 208 will go into the classroom. And we raise the revenue through a 3.5% surcharge on the 1% of the wealthiest Arizonans. So 99% of Arizonans will not pay a penny more. This will only be imposed on the 1% of the wealthiest Arizonans. And in Arizona, that would be individual filers who have taxable income in excess of $250,000 a year. Or if you file your taxes as a married couple, you have taxable income in excess of $500,000 a year. And the 3.5% surcharge is only imposed upon the revenue that is earned above those thresholds. So any amount below those thresholds, even if you're in the top 1%, is not touched. So as an example, a married couple earning $501,000 in taxable income, so they're $1,000 over the threshold, the 3.5% is only applied to the $1,000 above the threshold. So 3.5% of $1,000 is $35. So a married couple in that example with $501,000 in taxable income will pay $35 more per year with Proposition 208. And so you hear a lot from our opposition that this is going to double people's state taxes. That is absolutely false. The example I gave you, that's less than a 1% increase. Now, of course, the higher you get above the thresholds, the more you pay and the higher percentage, but it will not double anybody's state income taxes. It also, contrary to what our opposition is saying, will not give us one of the highest income tax rates in the country. In fact, with Proposition 208, those people who are in the top 1% are still going to pay a lower effective tax rate than the national average and will still pay a lower effective tax rate than most other states. Another example, a married couple in Arizona that makes $650,000 a year in taxable income will still pay less state income taxes in Arizona with Proposition 208 than they would in 34 other states. So when you hear our opposition saying that this is going to just give us this outrageous tax rate that's going to be hard to compete, we're still going to be below most other states. And so what you're hearing from our opposition is a lot of sky is falling, doomsday scenarios. Keep in mind, this is the same opposition that opposed the minimum wage tax hike in 2016. And if you were to read any of the talking points they had back in 2016, they're the exact same talking points that they're using now about how the minimum wage was going to devastate our economy, how it was going to hurt small businesses, how people were going to be fleeing our state, people would be losing their jobs. And now they're talking about how strong our economy is, and we can't afford to jeopardize this strong economy with Proposition 208. So it's really just an organization or opposition that no matter what sort of proposal we would have put out there, if it was raising taxes, they were going to oppose it. But unfortunately, the only way we can get to where we need to be to have a public school system that's funded, that is got the resources it needs, is to raise revenue, to raise taxes. And our opposition is, no matter what type of proposal we would have put out there, they would have probably opposed it. They've had 2 years since we got knocked off the ballot in 2018 to come up with a better proposal. They did not. They had all the years before that to come up with a better proposal. They did not. So they just want to oppose. And so we think, and I think if you talk to a lot of economists, either here in Arizona or nationally, many economists will tell you that one of the best investments states can make to improve their workforce, to improve their economy, is to invest in their public education system. And that's why a number of our neighboring states and many states across the country have been increasing their investments in public education much more so than Arizona in recent years. And Arizona has been falling further and further behind. And so we see Proposition 208 investing in education as an investment in businesses, as an investment in our economy. And we're excited that people will have an opportunity to finally vote on it this November. The polling is looking great. We've been doing a lot of polls for the last 3 years. You may have seen a couple of polls recently that have shown that we've been consistently 10 points up or more above our opposition. Monmouth University did a poll a couple of weeks ago that showed, I think, 66% support, and that's consistent with a lot of the polls we've been doing. I tell people, I think the most telling poll wasn't really a poll, but was the fact that we were able to get more than 435,000 Arizonans to put their signature on petitions to get this on the ballot in the middle of a pandemic. Many people, we started collecting signatures for this on February 14th, and little did we know that there was going to be a pandemic that was going to basically shut everything down just a couple of weeks later. And when that happened, a lot of people thought that we wouldn't have a chance. But we got creative. We put on masks and gloves and disposable pens and got signatures. And so when the time came to turn them in, we had more than 435,000. We only needed 230,000. So I think that more than anything shows how much people of Arizona are waiting to pass this, to get this on the ballot and now to vote for it, because they're tired of the legislature and others doing nothing to fix the funding crisis in our schools. And Proposition 208 will do that. It will fix a funding crisis. It will address our teacher shortage, and it will help to reduce class sizes. So I will pause here and see if anyone has any questions, and I'm happy to talk about other things if you'd like, but I'll just stop here and see if anyone has any questions.
All right. I encourage you to click on the participants icon at the bottom and ask your question. I have one for you right off the top, David. So the legislature has essentially cut education since 2008. How would the Prop 208's fund be distributed for teachers and teachers' aides and transportation and so forth?
Yeah, and I talk about 2008, but the truth is our legislature has actually been cutting education since 2000. We always talk about 2008 like, that was like good times, but we were actually only 44th in the country in 2008. We've since dropped to, we were 50th, and now we've gone back to like 49th or 48th in per pupil funding. But this is really like a 2 decades long span of underfunding our public schools. And so how Proposition 208 will be distributed is this. And you can also go to our website, which is investined.com. And this information is there as well, but I'll go through it. So as I said, we estimate that Proposition 208 will raise an estimated $940 million each year in new revenue. That $940 million estimate comes from the Department of Revenue. They did a model for us last fall. And so whatever the amount that's raised would go into a separate fund that the legislature can't touch. And then that money gets distributed directly to the schools. And the schools then, through their governing boards, can spend the money as follows. 50% of the money they received can be used to increase teacher salaries or the salaries of other certified staff. So these are positions that basically require a license or certification. And essentially those are school counselors and school nurses, behavioral therapists, and teachers. Those are in the 50% bucket. And counselors are in that bucket with teachers because they work very much one-on-one and in very much a role with students. So 50% of the revenue will go to increasing teacher salaries and those other certified positions. Another 25% of the revenue will go to increasing the salaries of other non-certified personnel. It cannot be used for any administrative costs. So these are the other positions in schools that are so important to educating kids. So things like librarians, classroom aides, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, custodial workers, school security staff. 25% then goes to increasing salaries or hiring new positions for those. So 50% for teachers, 25% for those positions. So 75% basically goes towards salaries for school staff. Then the next 12% goes to career and technical education. So these are primarily high schools that offer CTE programs, but they would be able to get funding. As I said, it would more than double state funding for career and technical education programming. So that's 12%. And then 10% goes to teacher mentoring programs. And this really is to address the teacher shortage crisis. And what we've found is that part of what's been contributing to the teacher shortage is we are losing a lot of teachers after just their first or second year of teaching. And as we've done surveys and talked to teachers, a lot of young new teachers just often don't have the support in the schools. And obviously teaching is a very difficult job. And many schools used to do a lot more in terms of mentoring and offering support for younger teachers. And that's been another victim, I guess, of the budget cuts over the years, is school districts have been able to, or have had to do away with a lot of the mentoring programs for new teachers. And so this will give schools the resources to help to mentor those young teachers so that hopefully we're keeping them in the profession. And then finally, the last 3% goes to the teachers' academies, which are programs at our universities, particularly to recruit teachers of people of color into the teaching profession. We have seen that we've not had a proportionate number of teachers of color that match the students of color that are in our schools, but just getting more people to go into the teaching profession in general. And so that 3% will help recruit more teachers into the teaching profession. And so that's basically the breakdown. And as I said, if you go to investined.com, which is our website, you can see more of that breakdown there. You can read the initiative on our website. And you can also make contributions. If you want to make even $5, $10 contributions are very helpful. Our opposition has already spent more than $18 million in television commercials in trying to oppose this. And so we are on the air as well, but we're much more of a volunteer-driven campaign. And so all those little $5 and $10 contributions add up to a lot. And so we really, if you want to make donations to this, you can go to investined.com. You can also sign up there if you want to volunteer to make phone calls or text message from your home. That's huge. We are finding, as I said, there's a lot of support for Prop 208, but there's also a big chunk of undecided voters right now that could sway this measure in either direction. And what we're finding is that when people get a live person calling them and talking to them about Prop 208, they almost always turn to the yes vote column. And so it doesn't take a lot. It just takes somebody calling them and just telling them the reasons why this is important. And so if you'd like to volunteer to make those calls, you can also go to investined.com.
All right, another question for you. In every state I've lived in, having good schools also meant high property values and nicer communities. Yet I just did a check, and the Commercial Real Estate Developers Association is opposing Prop 208. What don't they get about this?
We asked the same question in our campaign or coalition. It doesn't make sense. So much of this doesn't make sense in terms of why any of our opposition is opposing it, because, as I've been saying, this is good for our workforce. It's good for our economy. It's good for business. Even if you don't have children in schools, you benefit from new investments in our public education system. As was mentioned, we all benefit when our schools are doing well and they have the resources, because that means our property taxes, our homes are worth more. And so our property values increase. I've also been saying, the example I give is in small towns, but this really applies to all towns across Arizona. And that is, throughout Arizona, the public schools are among our largest employers, particularly in a lot of small towns across Arizona. And many of them have not been able to give their employees wage increases. Many of them have had to lay off employees over the last decade. So think about the impact when Prop 208 passes and they can suddenly give their employees wage increases. They can fill some of those positions. They can create new jobs. All of those people who work for some of the largest employers, our public schools, will then have more money in their pockets to go out and go to the stores and eat out when we can eat out again. And really, that's what boosts our economy. And that is good for small business. It's good for our economy. I would think, if the COVID pandemic has taught us anything, it's that it's all of us. It's everyday Arizonans who are the job creators. And when we have more money in our pockets, when we have higher earning potential, that's what drives the demand for businesses to be able to create the jobs. It's everyday Arizonans who are the job creators. And one of the most effective strategies to increase earnings of people is to invest in our education system so that they are increasing their educational attainment. So that benefits everyone when we invest in our education system. And so it's quite puzzling to see some of the opposition when they really are going to benefit from this. But we'll pass it, and then they can see, just like minimum wage, we passed it, and now a lot of people are trying to take credit for it a few years later.
Yeah, good point. We have a question from our board member, Susie Anderson. Susie, go ahead and ask away.
Thank you, David. It's so good to have you here. I was talking to my neighbor who said she has read the proposition and she can find nowhere that it said that the teachers are going to receive this money. And, I was just really flabbergasted. So I said, no, this is precisely to give the teachers, no administrators, the teachers, the staff, to support our, education in Arizona. And she said, well, I'll read it again. And she read it again. And, she said, no, it doesn't say anything about that. So what do you do?
I don't know what you do in that case other than maybe read it aloud to her. I don't know. It does say it. It says very specifically in there that the money goes to increase teacher salaries, that school districts can use it for that. So and that's the 50%, as I mentioned. So I don't know. I think it's very clear. It's not hidden. So yeah, I don't know. Other than read it aloud, I'm sure that's.
Yeah, I'm just flabbergasted. But, anybody who tells her something different, and she's pretty aware of my side of things, she is just contrary like that. And I'm sorry, I tried.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we're living in a time where people don't believe anything, it seems like. And even when it's in writing and it's very clear and specific and it's not ambiguous at all. I mean, literally it says they get the funds for a teacher increasing teacher salary. So, but what can you do?
All right, we have a question from Christina Early, also on our board. Go ahead and ask your question, Christina.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for being here. This is really important, and there's a lot of support for it, I think, here in our neighborhood from all the signs that I'm seeing. So that's
Good.
good. This is kind of
Assuming we get that.
okay. So when this passes, and we do not change the legislative makeup of the Arizona State Capitol, with the Senate and the House, is there any way that the Senate and the House could say, well, you got all this money through Prop 208, we're not going to fund you in the next budget? Is there an end run that they could do around this that we need to be aware?
Not really. First of all, these dollars are voted protected, so there's no way they can get their hands on this money. They can't reduce it.
Okay.
There's very specific language in the initiative that says that the legislature or school districts cannot supplant existing funding sources. So they can't say, okay, well, you've got this money, so there's no need for us to fund this part anymore. That doesn't mean that they can't, play other games and try and make changes to other parts of the school budgets. But, that's why I've been saying there's really two important education policies or education issues on the ballot in November. One is, well, Prop 208, there's also your school bonds and other things, but also I guess it's important that we are electing legislators who are pro-public education, because, even if they can't touch these dollars, this doesn't get us to the national average in funding. We've seen so many cuts. As I've said, our legislature has been cutting public education in Arizona since 2000. And so people always ask, how much annual funding would it take just to get to the national average? And it would take more than $4 billion a year in new revenue. And this will raise close to $1 billion. So it's a big step. I mean, this will be the biggest investments we've seen in 20 years into our public schools. But we need to make sure we are electing a legislature that recognizes the value of public education and is going to incrementally get us back to where we need to be. Instead of what we've seen for 20 years as a legislature that cuts every year, we don't have to get back to $4 billion in 1 year. But if we had a legislature that every year was putting a little bit more back into the pot, we would eventually get, at least pretty close. And so that's why I think it's really important. We got to pass Prop 208 because this is, critical revenue to address our funding crisis. But we really, really need to make sure that we are electing people who are going to do the right things for our public schools. And so it's a two-parter for this November.
Correct. I agree. Thank you so much. It's very interesting. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Larry, you're on mute.
We have a question from Andrea Kennedy, whom I think I know through Moms Demand Action on Gun Sense in America. Andrea, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. All right, well, wait for
Well,
her.
hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Hi, everybody. It's good
Yep.
to see you all. And Christina's question was kind of similar to mine. The idea, someone might ask, what could the money be rerouted? But it sounds like the answer is no. And so I'll ask with the funding, I think you said was 75% was salaries between teachers and support staff. And with the funding, does the funding gets sent directly to the school districts? Is that correct?
Correct. It gets distributed. What it does is the Department of Revenue collects tax revenue. They send it to the treasurer, who's basically like the bank for the state. And then this treasurer will send it directly to the school districts based on student population. And so there's a formula that school districts get funding. And so you get an amount of funding that's equivalent to your students. So, a school district that has 20,000 students will get more than the school district that has 4,000 students. And so it's proportional. And then when they get that money, and then it's up to the governing boards, the local governing boards, to decide how much of that 75%, 50% for teachers, 25% for other staff, how they want to divide it up. And like I said, they can use it to give teacher or wage increases, or they can also fill those jobs too. They can hire people into those positions with that funding as well.
And it sounds like the legislature must fund this then. They can't use that excuse they've used before.
The legislature has no say in this. They don't touch it. They have no say in how the money is used. The money goes right from the treasurer to the schools, and it can, the legislature can't stop it. They can't lessen it. They are completely out of the picture.
Thank you.
All right, thanks very much. Let's turn to Lillian Fox. Lillian, kindly unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
When you were talking about don't vote for people who don't support 208, we have two people who are running for the TUSD board who don't support 208. At the CARE Forum, candidates were asked to raise their hand if they supported 208. Nick Pearson did not, and he's spoken against it before. And the other person who also did not raise their hand is the write-in candidate. So she won't be listed on your ballot. You have to write her on in, but her name is Christine Manella. It horrifies me that people who are running for a school board would not support 208.
I wanted Lillian to repeat the names. Nick Pearson, I won't vote for anyway. He's an R. But what were the names again, please?
I think you're muted, but I can give you that. The other one is Christine Manella. Christine Manella. Craig, please unmute yourself and ask your question. Craig Markin.
Okay, you were talking about the opposition and how much money they're spending. Do you have any idea who is funding the opposition?
Yeah, good question. So the biggest funder is the Arizona Chamber of Commerce. Again, same group that opposed the minimum wage in 2016 and has opposed a lot of progressive efforts in the past. There have been a couple of fundraisers that the people who are leading the fundraising, the individual fundraising efforts, are former Vice President Quayle, who lives in Arizona now. He lives in Paradise Valley, I believe, and former Senator, U.S. Senator John Kyle. They have been kind of leading the fundraising efforts against us. But it's a lot of CEOs who, I don't know if you saw the first TV commercial that they ran against us was talking about how superintendents make $225,000 a year, which is not true. The average superintendent in Arizona makes $116,000 a year. And a lot of the superintendents are like running small corporations. I mean, these are organizations that have 10,000 or more students and sometimes 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 employees. So when that commercial ran, I actually looked up what's an average CEO for a corporation that size, and what do they make? And Arizona Republic actually does an article of the top CEOs and
all board members.
And a CEO of an organization that's the equivalent of a school district in Arizona, under that article, I saw that many of the CEOs are making like $2.5 million a year, while their employees were making about $52,000 a year. And so that's who's opposing this. It's the CEO organizations who have benefited really. I mean, people ask, why is it that we're just taxing the top 1%? It's because the top 1% have benefited from a lot of the tax breaks at our state legislature over the years, and it's made our tax code one of the most regressive in the country. I mentioned that we've seen some of the largest cuts to public education over the past decade. Right in the middle of that, in 2012 and 2013, when our state legislature was making the largest cuts to public schools in the country, those very same years, they passed the largest capital gains tax cuts in state history that overwhelmingly benefited the top 1%. And that's just one example of many of the tax breaks they have received over the years. And so those are the people who are opposing us, the ones who like those tax breaks, and don't want to pay more to support the things that we all benefit from, which is our public schools.
All right, let's turn to Steve Linder, our treasurer. Steve, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, David, this is going to go along with Christina's question, but to take it one step further, I'm going to be very optimistic saying, okay, 208 wins big, and the Democrats gain control of one house or more of the legislature. Now, from your experience being up there, do you foresee the possibility of a lame duck session after the election and sometime between when the next legislature takes their seats for the present legislature in their insanity to go and try and destroy what we already have somehow, and somehow lock the hands of the legislature coming in, or do something in a lame duck session? Do you foresee that happening?
I hope not. Some people asked me that same thing just last week. We were talking about it. And, we saw that, I think it was Wisconsin and Michigan, when their legislatures flipped and they had a Republican majority that was outgoing with Republican governors, and they engaged in all kinds of mischief in that, lame duck period. I hope not, but there's nothing in place that would prohibit them from doing that. And so I think we'll just have to all be on guard and see what happens. They, in terms of 208, like I said, they can't touch it. It's voter protected. They could try and do other things. My worry would be, not just education, but what are some other things, in all aspects, whether it's healthcare or, if we flip if one or two chambers flip, what would they try to do before they lost power? And so, it has been done in other states. I guess, Ducey still wants to run for something, I'm assuming. And so it's somewhere down the road. And so I guess we would just have to make it as painful for him as possible to see, there would be a price to pay if he was to play a role in doing that down the road politically, but let's hope not.
All right. I have a question for you, David. I just looked up that the average teacher salary in the US is $60,000 for a school teacher. Whereas here in Arizona, the average is $48,000. And, I believe we come up near the bottom of the list, maybe above only Alabama. But when Prop 208 passes, can you give us some estimates of what the average teacher salary might go up to?
Yeah, I think we will get to the national average for the state. It will depend on schools. It's hard to give like a flat amount, because teacher pay ranges depend on the school districts, and it depends on your seniority. It depends how long you've been teaching. It depends where high school teachers typically make more than, say, great elementary school teachers. So, but I do think we will get to the national average for teacher pay with 208. but I can't say like teachers are going to make X amount more because it really is a school district by school district based situation.
All right. One of the things I keep hearing about from the opposition to Prop 208 is that it'll hurt small businesses. And I don't really see how this is possible because, a business has gross receipts and then you deduct all the expenses and then you get to taxable income. Tell me about how you respond to that this Prop 208 might be bad for small businesses.
It's another one of the scare tactics by our opposition, one that can be kind of effective because we all value our small businesses. We all appreciate them, and particularly in these difficult economic times. But the fact is that with Prop 208, small businesses are not going to pay a penny more. Prop 208 only impacts the individual income taxes. And so there are some types of what are called pass-through businesses where the net profits are taxed on the individual's income taxes. But that, again, is only if you're in the top 1% would you be impacted. And so most small business owners that I've talked to are just puzzled because they say we make nowhere near the thresholds to be impacted by Prop 208. And that makes sense because according to the Small Business Administration, the average net income for small business owners in Arizona is $48,000 a year, which is well below the thresholds to be impacted by Prop 208. And then another key point, as you mentioned, if you are an individual who owns a business, it's only the net income, the amount that you take home as your individual income that gets reported on your individual income tax. And so many of these businesses that are on the larger side, if for example, a business that makes $800,000 a year in net profit, oftentimes those businesses don't have just one owner. Oftentimes there's like 4, 5, 6 owners, and they each take a share of those net profits. They divide it up equally. So if you even had a larger company that had, let's say, $800,000 in net profits, if they had 4 owners, they would each take $200,000 each. And that's so each of them, none of them will be above the thresholds of Prop 208. And so very, very few individuals who own small businesses will be impacted. But again, I keep coming back to, if you do get impacted by Prop 208, it's because you're in the top 1% of the wealthiest Arizonans. Those are not your typical mom and pop small businesses. Those are much larger, much very successful businesses. And so it's really just, again, a scare tactic by our opposition to say that this is going to impact small businesses. It really will not.
All right, I want to encourage people to ask a question. Just click on the participants button and raise your hand. David, could you go into a little bit more detail about how Prop 208 will help Arizona's economy and make us have a better economy?
Yeah, sure. So, I'll just take the career and technical education aspect. And so that has been cut over the years because of the budget cuts at the state capitol. This is another one of those. This is kind of like, I think it was Lillian's question, why do the homeowners or the Home Builders Association or whoever oppose this? Because this helps home values. But also, why are the organizations like the Chamber of Commerce and some of these other business groups opposing this when it almost more than doubles state funding for career and technical education? And if you go to any of these organizations' websites and you look at like what have been some of their legislative priorities in recent years, and many of them have really been advocating for more money for career and technical education programs because they see what strong benefit this is for our workforce. And yet they're opposing this, and it doubles the funding for that. And so this career and technical education, there's a lot of research that shows that these programs not only give students the skills so that if maybe they're not even thinking of going to college, they could often get jobs right out of high school in trades and other things. And these are, great skills that they get in high school. But these programs also do boost college going rates. Kids that go through these programs tend to go to college more regularly. They also lower dropout rates. So just that aspect alone, career and technical education, it's estimated that for every $1 you put into those programs, you get $12 back in economic benefits. So that piece alone will deliver more than $1 billion in economic benefits in return. The other piece I would talk about is the health and wellness aspect of Prop 208 and the benefits from that. Obviously, we're going through a pandemic. Some school districts are starting to go back to in-person learning. Others will, I think over time. But when school districts start to go back to in-person, we know that they're going to have students that are spaced out, with, further apart, which is going to mean more people in the schools, more teachers, more classroom aides, but also more school nurses and counselors to make sure of the mental and physical well-being of students. And those are positions that school districts have had to eliminate over the years. We have in Arizona the highest student to counselor ratio. We have 900 students to every counselor in Arizona. And so Prop 208, the revenue can be used to hire more school counselors and to hire more school nurses. We've lost a lot of school nurses because of budget cuts. And so when you think about a pandemic and coming back from a pandemic and making sure that schools have the resources to keep students safe and healthy, Prop 208 will help in that regard as well.
All right. Jeannie Christie, another member of our board, is here. Jeannie, unmute yourself and ask David your question. Also turn on your video.
I'm trying. There we go. Hi. Okay, David, thank you so much for being here, and congrats that we have finally gotten this far with 208. I do a lot of phone banking, and I was wondering, I had to step away from the meeting for a moment. Have you gone over the main opposition that people are spouting? So just so I know, so when I'm phone banking, I can be prepared for it and know how to approach that.
Yeah, so the main opposition points is that this is going to more than double our state taxes. Completely false. As I mentioned, we will still be below the national average. And even if you're in that top 1% of the wealthiest, you will still pay lower state income taxes than the national average in most other states. Mm-hmm. So that part's false. That's one of their biggest arguments. And then the other is the small business, that this is somehow going to hurt small businesses. And as I was mentioning, most small businesses make nowhere near the taxable income to hit the thresholds of Prop 208. So this does not impact small businesses. If you're an individual that gets some income from a business and you're in that top 1%, it's because you're in the top 1% of the wealthiest, mm-hmm. which is a very successful business. So you're hearing some of the opposition saying, well, why would we want to tax small business owners who are struggling to keep their doors open in this economic crisis? Well, if they're struggling to keep their doors open, then they probably don't have net profits of $500,000 or more a year. Net profits. I mean, if you're struggling to keep the doors open, you're not in the 1% of the wealthiest Arizonans. And mm-hmm. so that is just not true. And so those are I think the biggest arguments. The other one I think you hear a lot is that school districts waste a lot of money, and that why are we giving them more? And for that argument to be coming from our opposition, from that argument to be coming from really, a lot of the Republican legislators who have been cutting school district budgets for the past decade, I think that takes a lot of nerve for them to be saying that school districts are wasting money when they have literally been cutting budgets every year for 2 decades, and school principals and school superintendents have been having to make these difficult decisions of, do we fix the brakes on the school bus, Or do we repair the leaky roof in the classroom? Or do we keep the classroom aides who are so critical to helping teachers teach the students? Those are the difficult decisions, and school districts have been, really doing a really amazing job with very limited resources. And so it really is pretty galling that the opposition would say that they are wasting money when they are really doing a very good job with very limited resources. And to that point, according to the US Census Bureau and according to the Auditor General's office here in Arizona, Arizona's public schools are the fourth lowest in administrative costs in the country. So Arizona schools spend very little on administration. They do a very efficient job with very limited resources. And so those are the main points that you hear. All of them are completely false from our opposition.
Thank you.
And just a call out to Susie Anderson. I just looked up online the text of Proposition 208, and it states there right on page 2 that 50% of the funds raised will be devoted to hiring teachers and classroom support and increasing the base compensation for teachers. So Susie asked the person who's objecting to just read page 2 of the initiative. Let's see. Well, I'll tell you what, David, seeing that we have no further questions.
Paul has a question.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Ask your question. Paul Stapleton Smith, I believe you're talking about. Let's see. We just need you to unmute yourself, Paul.
Okay.
There.
If we're good now, thank you. David, thank you for being here to do this. And of course, we talked about this with our labor unions and our labor federation for a long, long time. We worked, endorsed, as so many people did, huge lift, and commend everybody who did the lift, because our legislature and our governor wouldn't. This is a powerful way to answer powerful people who don't want to do this. Having said that, I do a lot of phone banking, like most of the people on this call, day and night. So one of the things that I get back occasionally is that will this money go to for-profit charter schools and religious schools? And we're changing votes over the phone right now as we speak, as those of us who are phone banking. And could you clarify that for me?
Sure.
Please. Thank you.
It will not go to any religious schools. That's strictly prohibited. Those are truly private schools. Charter schools are considered public schools in Arizona, so they get the funding, but it only, they have to spend it in the very specific ways. And so let's hope that our Auditor General and the oversight that we're hearing is going to be coming for charter schools are doing more audits, because if they do misuse those dollars, they can be criminally charged if they're using them for other reasons. So.
Just wanted to share my screen a little bit with some information I found about how the funds will be distributed. There are many places you can go to find this information, but basically on Ballotpedia, it says right here, 50% goes to school districts to hire teachers and classroom support personnel. 25% goes to hire school support services and increase their personnel, and 10% to school districts and charter schools to provide mentoring and retention programs. So it's clear to see that this is a very beneficial program. And with that, David, we're almost out of time. I wondered if you would be kind enough to summarize your remarks and let us know what we can do to support your efforts.
Yeah, well, first, thank you. Paul mentioned, and he and a lot of you were out there in a pandemic with masks on and gloves getting signatures for this, and thank you for that. I mean, that's huge. The fact that we were able to get on the ballot and now Arizonans have an opportunity to vote, thank you for all of you who've been making phone calls and just all of you, thank you for who are supporting this. I just always point out why this is important, and just thinking about all of the students for the last 20 years who have started in our public schools in kindergarten and have gone through all 12 years of their K-12 public education experience in one of the most underfunded public education systems in the country, and what that has already done to our workforce and how much stronger our economy could have been if we had invested 20 years ago. But let's fix this going forward. Let's not let the kids who are entering kindergarten now have that same experience. Let's let them go through a K-12 that have the resources to give them a quality education, because that's what's going to strengthen our workforce. That's what's going to strengthen our economy. And I think that's why so many people are just so excited about this, because we've been dealing with this for so long. And this really will provide our schools with some of the most biggest investments that we've seen in 2 decades. And so thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And investined.com is where you can go for more information. Thanks.
All right, David, thank you very much for your time. We enjoyed having you here. It was a terrific presentation. And, I myself have voted early, and I voted for Prop 208.
Right.
And I'm sure everybody on the call has too. So,
I'm still waiting for my ballot. I haven't got it yet. I'm hoping, well, it won't be today, maybe tomorrow.
okay, well, hopefully soon. Well, thanks again for your time, and look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks.